Welcome to this compilation of 4 dark and deadly sci-fi short stories. I'll be narrating The Moons of Mars by Dean Evans, Dead Ringer by Lester Del Rey, The Way Out by Richard R. Smith, and Tony and the Beetles by Philip K. Dick. If you find yourself enjoying the story, I'd appreciate you hitting the like button. And as you go along, feel free to share your thoughts, ideas, and memories of the stories down in the comments. It's always a pleasure to read them. The Moons of Mars by Dean Evans. Narrated by William Skye. Every boy should be able to whistle, except of course Martians. But this one did. He seemed a very little boy to be carrying so large a butterfly net. He swung it in his chubby right fist as he walked, and at first glance you couldn't be sure if he were carrying it or it carrying him. He came whistling. All little boys whistle. To little boys, whistling is as natural as breathing. However, there was something peculiar about this particular little boy's whistling. Or rather, there were 2 things peculiar, but each was related to the other. The first was that he was a Martian little boy. You could be very sure of that, for Earth little boys have earlobes while Martian little boys do not, and he most certainly didn't. The second was the tune he whistled, a somehow familiar tune, but one which I should have thought not very appealing to a little boy. "Hi there," I said when he came near enough. "What's that you're whistling?" He stopped whistling and he stopped walking, both at the same time, as though he had pulled a switch or turned a tap that shut them off. Then he lifted his little head and stared up into my eyes. "The calm," he said in a sober little boy voice. "The what?" I asked. "From the William Tell overture," he explained, still looking up at me. He said it deadpan and his wide brown eyes never once batted. "Oh," I said, "and where did you learn that?" "My mother taught me." I blinked at him. He didn't blink back. His round little face still held no expression, but if it had, I knew it would have matched the title of the tune he whistled. "You whistle very well," I told him. That pleased him. His eyes lit up and an almost smile flirted with the corners of his small mouth. He nodded grave agreement. "Been after butterflies, I see. I'll bet you didn't get any. This is the wrong season." The light in his eyes snapped off. "Well, goodbye," he said abruptly and very relevantly. "Goodbye," I said. His whistling and his walking started up again in the same spot where they had left off. I mean, the note he resumed on was the note which followed the one interrupted, and the step he took was with the left foot, which was the one he would have used if I hadn't stopped him. I followed him with my eyes. An unusual little boy. A most precisely mechanical little boy. When he was almost out of sight, I took off after him, wondering. The house he went into was over in that crumbling section which forms a curving boundary line, marking the limits of those frantic and ugly original mine workings made many years ago by the early colonists. It seems that someone had told someone who had told someone else that here, a mere 20 feet beneath the surface, was a vein as wide as a house and as long as a fisherman's alibi, of pure, mind you, gold. Back in those days, to be a colonist meant to be a rugged individual, and to be a rugged individual meant to not give a damn one way or another, and to not give a damn one way or another meant to make one hell of a mess on the placid face of Mars. There had not been any gold found, of course, and now, for the most part, the mining shacks so hastily thrown up were only fever scars of a sickness long gone and little remembered. A few of the houses were still occupied, like the one into which the Martian boy had just disappeared. So his mother had taught him the William Tell overture, had she? That tickling thought made me chuckle as I stood before the ramshackle building. And then, suddenly, I stopped chuckling and began to think, instead, of something quite astonishing. How had it been possible for her to teach, and for him to whistle? All Martians are as tone-deaf as a bucket of lead. I went up 3 slab steps and rapped loudly on the weather-beaten door. The woman who faced me may have been as young as 22, but she didn't look it. That shocked look which comes with the first realization that youth has slipped quietly away downstream in the middle of the night and left nothing but frightening rocks of middle age to show cold and grey in the hard light of dawn, was like the validation stamp of time itself in her wide, wise eyes. And her voice wasn't young anymore either. "Well, and what did I do now?" "I beg your pardon?" I said. "You're mobile security, aren't you? Or is that badge you're wearing just something to cover a hole in your shirt?" "Yes, I'm security, but does it have to mean something?" I asked. "All I did was knock on your door." "I heard it." Her lips were curled slightly at one corner. I worked up a smile for her and let her see it for a few seconds before I answered. "As a matter of fact, I don't want to see you at all. I didn't know you lived here, and I don't know who you are. I'm not even interested in who you are. It's the little boy who just went in here that I was interested in. The little Martian boy, I mean." Her eyes spread as though somebody had put fingers on her lids at the outside corners and then cruelly jerked them apart. "Come in," she almost gasped. I followed her. When I leaned back against the plain door, it closed protestingly. I looked around. It wasn't much of a room, but then you couldn't expect much of a room in a little ghost of a place like this. A few knickknacks of the locality stood about on 2 tables and a shelf, bits of rock with streak veins of fused corundum, not bad if you like the appearance of squeezed blood. There were 2 chairs and a large table intended to match the chairs, and a rough divan kind of thing made of discarded cratings which had probably been hauled here from the international spaceport 10 miles to the west. In the back wall of the room was a doorway that led dimly to somewhere else in the house. Nowhere did I see the little boy. I looked once again at the woman. "What about him?" she whispered. Her eyes were still startled. I smiled reassuringly. "Nothing, lady, nothing. I'm sorry I upset you. I was just being nosy is all, and that's the truth of it. You see, the little boy went by me a while ago and he was whistling. He whistles remarkably well. I asked him what the name of the tune was, and he told me it was The Calm from William Tell. He also told me his mother had taught him." Her eyes hadn't budged from mine, hadn't flickered. They might have been bright, moist marbles glued above her cheeks. She said one word only. "Well?" "Nothing," I answered, "except that Martians are supposed to be tone-deaf, aren't they? It's something lacking in their sense of hearing. So when I heard this little boy and saw he was a Martian, and when he told me his mother had taught him..." I shrugged and laughed a little. "Like I said before, I guess I got just plain nosy." She nodded. "We agree on that last part." Perhaps it was her eyes, or perhaps it was the tone of her voice, or perhaps, and more simply, it was her attitude in general. But whatever it was, I suddenly felt that, nosy or not, I was being treated shabbily. "I would like to speak to the Martian lady," I said. "There isn't any Martian lady." "There has to be, doesn't there?" I said it with little sharp prickers on the words. But she did too. "Does there?" I gawked at her and she stared back. And the stare she gave me was hard and at the same time curiously defiant, as though she would dare me to go on with it. As though she figured I hadn't the guts. For a moment I just blinked stupidly at her, as I had blinked stupidly at the little boy when he told me his mother had taught him how to whistle. And then, after what seemed to me a very long while, I slowly tumbled to what she meant. Her eyes were telling me that the little Martian boy wasn't a little Martian boy at all, that he was crossbreed, a little chap who had a Martian father and a human, Earth-woman mother. It was a startling thought, for there just aren't any such mixed marriages. Or at least I had thought there weren't. Physically, spiritually, mentally, or by any other standard you can think of, compared to a human male, the Martian isn't anything you'd want around the house. I finally said, "So that is why he is able to whistle." She didn't answer. Even before I spoke, her eyes had seen the correct guess, which had probably flashed naked and astounded in my own eyes. and then she swallowed with a laboured breath that went trembling down inside her. "There isn't anything to be ashamed of," I said gently. "Back on Earth there's a lot of mixtures, you know. Some people even claim there's no such thing as a pure race. I don't know, but I guess we all started somewhere and intermarried plenty since." She nodded. Somehow her eyes didn't look defiant anymore. "Where's his father?" I asked. He's dead." "I'm sorry. Are you all right? I mean, do you get along okay and everything now that—" I stopped. I wanted to ask her if she was starving by slow degrees and needed help. Lord knows the careworn look about her didn't show it was luxurious living she was doing, at least not lately. "Look," I said suddenly, "would you like to go home to Earth? I could fix—" But that was the wrong approach. Her eyes snapped and her shoulders stiffened angrily, and the words that ripped out of her mouth were not coated with honey. "Get the hell out of here, you fool!" I blinked again. When the flame in her eyes suddenly seemed to grow even hotter, I turned on my heel and went to the door. I opened it, went out on the top slab step. I turned back to close the door and looked straight into her eyes. She was crying, but that didn't mean exactly what it looked like it might mean. Her right hand had the door edge gripped tightly and she was swinging it with all the strength she possessed. And while I still stared, the door slammed savagely into the casing with a shock that jarred the slab under my feet, and flying splinters from the rotten woodwork stung my flinching cheeks. I shrugged and turned around and went down the steps. "And that is the way it goes," I muttered disgustedly to myself. "Thinking to be helpful with the firewood problem, you give a woman a nice sharp axe and she immediately puts it to use. On you." I looked up just in time to avoid running into a spread-legged man who was standing motionless directly in the middle of the sand path in front of the door. His hands were on his hips and there was something in his eyes which might have been a leer. "Pulled a howler in there, eh, mate?" he said. He chuckled hoarsely in his throat. "Not being exactly deaf, I heard the tail end of it." His chuckle was a lewd thing, a thing usually reserved, if it ever was reserved at all, for the men's rooms of some of the lower-class dives. And then he stopped chuckling and frowned instead and said complainingly, "Regular little spitfire, ain't she? I ask you now, wouldn't you think a gal which had got herself in a little jam, so to speak, would be more reasonable?" His words chopped short and he almost choked on the final unuttered syllable. His glance had dropped to my badge, and the look on his face was one of startled surprise. "Aye," he said. I cocked a frown of my own at him. "Well, so long, mate," he grunted, and spun around and dug his toes in the sand and was away. I stood there staring at his rapidly disappearing form for a few moments, and then looked back once more at the house. A tattered cotton curtain was just swinging to in the dirty sand-blown window. That seemed to mean the woman had been watching. I sighed, shrugged again, and went away myself. When I got back to security headquarters, I went to the file and began to rifle through pictures. I didn't find the woman, but I did find the man. He was a killer named Harry Smythe. I took the picture into the chief's office and laid it on his desk, waited for him to look down at it and study it for an instant, and then to look back up to me, which he did. "So," he said, "wanted, isn't he?" He nodded. "But a lot of good that'll do. He's holed up somewhere back on Earth." "No," I said. "He's right here. I just saw him." "What?" He nearly leaped out of his chair. "I didn't know who he was at first," I said. "It wasn't until I looked in the files." He cut me off. His hand darted into his desk drawer and pulled out an authority card. He shoved the card at me. He growled, "Kill or capture. I'm not especially fussy which. Just get him." I nodded and took the card. As I left the office, I was thinking of something which struck me as somewhat more than odd. I had idly listened to a little half-breed Martian boy whistling part of the William Tell overture, and it had led me to a wanted killer named Harry Smythe. Understandably, Mr. Smythe did not produce himself on a silver platter. I spent the remainder of the afternoon trying to get a lead on him and got nowhere. If he was hiding in any of the places I went to, then he was doing it with mirrors, for on Mars an authority card is the big stick than which there is no bigger. Not solely is it a warrant, it is a commandeer of help from anyone to whom it is presented, and wherever I showed it I got respect. I got instant attention. I got even more, those wraith-like tremblings in the darker corners of saloons, those corners where light never seems quite to penetrate. You don't look into those. Not if you're anything more than a ghoul, you don't. Not finding him wasn't especially alarming. What was alarming, though, was not finding the Earth woman and her little half-breed Martian son when I went back to the tumble-down shack where they lived. It was empty. She had moved fast. She hadn't even left me a note saying goodbye. That night I went into the Great Northern Desert to the Harimheb Reservation where the Martians still try to act like Martians. It was festival night, and when I got there they were doing the dance to the 2 moons. At times like this you want to leave the Martians alone. With that thought in mind, I pinned my authority card to my lapel directly above my badge and went through the gates. The huge circle fire was burning and the dance was in progress. Briefly, this can be described as something like the ceremonial dances put on centuries ago by the ancient Aborigines of North America. There was one important exception, however. Instead of a central fire, the Martians dig a huge circular trench and fill it with dried roots of the bellu tree and set fire to it. Being pitch-like, the gnarled fragments burn for hours. Inside this ring sit the spectators, and in the exact centre are the dancers. For music, they use the drums. The dancers were both men and women, and they were as naked as Martians can get, but their dance was a thing of grace and loveliness. For an instant, before anyone observed me, I stood motionless and watched the sinuously undulating movements, and I thought, as I have often thought before, that this is one thing the Martians can still do beautifully. Which, in a sad sort of way, is a commentary on the way things have gone since the first rocket-blasting ship set down on these purple sands. I felt the knife dig my spine. Carefully I turned around and pointed my index finger to my badge and card. Bared teeth glittered at me in the flickering light, and then the knife disappeared as quickly as it had come. "Wahank," I said. "The chief. Take me to him." The Martian turned, went away from the half-light of the circle. He led me some yards off to the north to a swooping tent. Then he stopped, pointed. "Wahank," he said. I watched him slip away. Wahank is an old Martian. I don't think any Martian before him has ever lived so long, and doubtless none after him will either. His leathery, almost purple-black skin was rough and had a charred look about it, and up around the eyes were little plaits and folds that had the appearance of being done deliberately by a Martian sand artist. "Good evening," I said, and sat down before him and crossed my legs. He nodded slowly. His old eyes went to my badge. From there they went to the authority card. "Power sign of the Earthmen," he muttered. "Not necessarily," I said. "I'm not here for trouble. I know as well as you do that before tonight is finished, more than half of your men and women will be drunk on illegal whiskey." He didn't reply to that. "And I don't give a damn about it," I added distinctly. His eyes came deliberately up to mine and stopped there. He said nothing. He waited. Outside the drums throbbed, slowly at first, then moderated in tempo. It was like the throbbing, or sobbing if you prefer, of the old pumps whose shafts go so tirelessly down into the planet for such pitifully thin streams of water. "I'm looking for an Earth woman," I said. "This particular Earth woman took a Martian for a husband." "That is impossible," he grunted bitterly. "I would have said so too," I agreed. "Until this afternoon, that is." His old dried lips began to purse and wrinkle. "I met her little son," I went on. "A little semi-human boy with Martian features. Or, if you want to turn it around and look at the other side, a little Martian boy who whistles." His teeth went together with a snap. I nodded and smiled. "You know who I'm talking about." For a long, long while he didn't answer. His eyes remained unblinking on mine, and if earlier in the day I had thought the little boy's face was expressionless, then I didn't completely appreciate the meaning of that word. Wahank's face was more than expressionless. It was simply blank. They disappeared from the shack they were living in, I said. They went in a hurry, a very great hurry. That one he didn't answer either. I would like to know where she is. Why? His whisper was brittle. She's not in trouble, I told him quickly. She's not wanted, nor her child either. It's just that I have to talk to her. Why? I pulled out the file photo of Harry Smythe and handed it across to him. His wrinkled hand took it, pinched it, held it up close to a lamp hanging down from one of the ridge poles. His eyes squinted at it for a long moment before he handed it back. I have never seen this Earthman, he said. All right, I answered. There wasn't anything that made me think you had. The point is that he knows the woman. It follows naturally that she might know him. This one is wanted? His old broken tones went up slightly on the last word. I nodded. For murder. Murder, he spat the word. But not for the murder of a Martian, eh? Martians are not that important anymore. His old eyes hated me with an intensity I didn't relish. You said that, old man, not I. A little time went by. The drums began to beat faster. They were rolling out a lively tempo now, a tempo you could put music to. He said at last, I do not know where the woman is, nor the child. He looked me straight in the eyes when he said it, and almost before the words were out of his mouth, they were whipped in again on a drawn-back, great sucking breath. For somewhere outside, somewhere near that dancing circle, in perfect time with the lively beat of the drums, somebody was whistling. It was a clear, clean sound, a merry, bright, happy sound, as sharp and as precise as the thrust of a razor through a piece of soft yellow cheese. In your teeth, Wahank! Right in your teeth! He only looked at me for another dull instant, and then his eyes slowly closed and his hands folded together in his lap. Being caught in a lie only bores a Martian. I got up and went out of the tent. The woman never heard me approach. Her eyes were toward the flaming circle and the dancers within, and too, I suppose, to her small son who was somewhere in that circle with them whistling. She leaned against the bole of a bellu tree with her arms down and slightly curled backward around it. That's considered bad luck, I said. Her head jerked around with my words, reflected flames from the circle fire still flickering in her eyes. That's a bellu tree, I said. Embracing it like that is like looking for a ladder to walk under. Or didn't you know? Would it make any difference? She spoke softly, but the words came to me above the drums and the shouts of the dancers. How much bad luck can you have in one lifetime, anyway? I ignored that. Why did you pull out of that shack? I told you you had nothing to fear from me. She didn't answer. I'm looking for the man you saw me talking with this morning, I went on. Lady, he's wanted, and this thing on my lapel is an authority card. Assuming you know what it means, I'm asking you where he is. What man? Her words were flat. His name is Harry Smythe. If that meant anything to her, I couldn't tell. In the flickering light from the fires, subtle changes in expression weren't easily detected. Why should I care about an Earthman? My husband was a Martian, and he's dead, see? Dead. Just a Martian. Not fit for anything like all Martians. Just a bum who fell in love with an Earthwoman and had the guts to marry her. Do you understand? So somebody murdered him for it. Ain't that pretty? Ain't that something to make you throw back your head and be proud about? Well, ain't it? And let you tell me, mister, whoever it was, I'll get him. I'll get him. I could see her face now, all right. It was a twisted, tortured thing that writhed at me in its agony. It was small yellow teeth that bared at me in viciousness. It was eyes that brimmed with boiling, bubbling hate like a ladle of molten steel splashing down on bare white flesh. Or, simply, it was the face of a woman who wanted to kill the killer of her man. And then, suddenly, it wasn't. Even though the noise of the dance and the dancers was loud enough to command the attention and the senses, I could still hear her quiet sobbing, and I could see the heaving of the small, thin shoulders. And I knew then the reason for old Wahank's bitterness when he had said to me, "But not for the murder of a Martian, eh? Martians are not that important anymore." What I said then probably sounded as weak as it really was. "I'm sorry, kid. But look, just staking out in that old shack of yours and trying to pry information out of the type of men who drifted your way, well, I mean, there wasn't much sense in that now, was there?" I put an arm around her shoulders. "He must have been a pretty nice guy," I said. "I don't think you'd have married him if he wasn't." I stopped. Even in my own ears my words sounded comfortless. I looked up over at the flaming circle and at the sweat-laved dancers within it. The sound of the drums was a wild, cacophonous tattoo now, a rattle of speed and savagery combined, and those who moved to its frenetic jabberings were not dancers anymore, but only frenzied, jerking figurines on the strings of a puppeteer gone mad. I looked down again at the woman. "Your little boy in his butterfly net," I said softly, "in a season when no butterflies can be found. What was that for? Was he part of the plan too, and the net just the alibi that gave him a passport to wander where he chose? So that he could listen, pick up a little information here, a little there?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to answer. My guesses can be as good as anybody's. After a long while she looked up into my eyes. "His name was Tahili," she said. "He had the secret. He knew where the gold vein was. And soon, in a couple of years maybe, when all the prospectors were gone and he knew it would be safe, he was going to stake a claim and go after it. For us. For the three of us." I sighed. There wasn't, isn't, never will be any gold on this planet. But who in the name of God could have the heart to ruin a dream like that? Next day I followed the little boy. He left the reservation in a cheery frame of mind, his whistle sounding loud and clear on the thin morning air. He didn't go in the direction of town, but the other way, toward the ruins of the ancient temple city of the Moons. I watched his chubby arm and the swinging of the big butterfly net on the end of that arm. Then I followed along in his sandy tracks. It was desert country, of course. There wasn't any chance of tailing him without his knowledge, and I knew it. I also knew that before long he'd know it too. And he did, but he didn't let me know he did until we came to the Rag Cliffs, those filigree walls of stone that hide the entrance to the Valley of the Two Moons. Once there, he paused and placed his butterfly net on a rock ledge and then calmly sat down and took off his shoes to dump the sand while he waited for me. "Well," I said, "good morning." He looked up at me. He nodded politely. Then he put on his shoes again and got to his feet. "You've been following me," he said, and his brown eyes stared accusingly into mine. "I have?" "That isn't an honourable thing to do," he said very gravely. "A gentleman doesn't do that to another gentleman." I didn't smile. "And what would you have me do about it?" "Stop following me, of course, sir." "Very well," I said. "I won't follow you any more. Will that be satisfactory?" "Quite, sir." Without another word, he picked up his butterfly net and disappeared along a path that led through a rock crevice. Only then did I allow myself to grin. It was a sad and pitying and affectionate kind of grin. I sat down and did with my shoes as he had done. There wasn't any hurry. I knew where he was going. There could only be one place, of course, the city of Deimos and Phobos. Other than that, he had no choice. And I thought I knew the reason for his going. Several times in the past there have been men who, bitten with the fever of an idea that somewhere on this red planet there must be gold, have done prospecting among the ruins of the old temples. He had probably heard that there were men there now, and he was carrying out, with the thoroughness of his precise little mind, the job he had set himself of finding the killer of his daddy. I took a shortcut over the rag cliffs and went down a winding, sand-worn path. The temple stones stood out barren and dry-looking, like breastbones from the desiccated carcass of an animal. For a moment I stopped and stared down at the ruins. I didn't see the boy. He was somewhere down there, though, still swinging his butterfly net and probably still whistling. I started up once more. And then I heard it, a shrill blast of sound in an octave of urgency, a whistle, sure, but a warning one. I stopped in my tracks from the shock of it. Yes, I knew from whom it had come all right, but I didn't know why. And then the whistle broke off short. One instant it was in the air, shrieking with a message. The next it was gone. But it left tailings like the echo of a death cry slowly floating back over the dead body of the creature that uttered it. I dropped behind a fragment of the rag cliff. A shot barked out angrily. Splinters of the rock crazed the morning air. The little boy screamed, just once. I waited. There was a long silence after that. Then, finally, I took off my hat and threw it out into the valley. The gun roared once more. This time I placed it a little to the left below me. I took careful sighting on the hand that held that gun, and I didn't miss it. It was Harry Smythe, of course. When I reached him, he had the injured hand tucked tightly in the pit of his other arm. There was a grim look in his eyes, and he nodded as I approached him. "Good shooting, mate. Should be a promotion in it for you. Shooting like that, I mean." "That's nice to think about," I said. "Where's the boy? I owe him a little something. If he hadn't whistled a warning, you could have picked me off neat." "I would," he nodded calmly. "Where is he?" "Behind the rock there, in that little alcove, sort of." He indicated with his chin. I started forward. I watched him, but I went toward the rock. "Just a minute, mate." I stopped. I didn't lower my gun. "That bloody wench we spoke about yesterday. You know, out in front of that shack. Well, just a thought, of course, but if you pull me in and if I get it, what'll become of her, do you suppose? Mean to say, I couldn't support her when I was dead, could I?" "Support her?" Surprise jumped into my voice. "What I said. She's my wife, you know. Back on Earth, I mean. I skipped out on her a few years back, but yesterday I was on my way to looking her up when you—" "She didn't recognize the name Harry Smythe," I said coldly. "I'm afraid you'll have to think a little faster." "Of course she didn't. How could she? That ain't my name. What made you think it was?" Bright beads of sweat sparkled on his forehead, and his lips had that frantic looseness of lips not entirely under control. "You left her," I grunted, "but you followed her across space anyway, just to tell her you were sorry and you wanted to come back. Is that it?" "Well," his eyes were calculating, "not the God's honest, mate, no. I didn't know she was here, not at first. But there was this spider, see? This Martian. His name was Tahili, and he used to hang around the saloons and he talked a lot, see? Then's when I knew." "So it was you who killed him," I said. "One murder wasn't enough back on Earth. You had to pile them up on the planets." I could feel something beginning to churn inside of me. "Wait. Sure, I knocked off the Martian, but a fair fight, see? That spider jumped my claim. A fair fight it was, and anybody'd done the same. But even without that, he had it coming anyway, wouldn't you say? Bigamist and all that, you know. I mean, marrying a woman already married." His lips were beginning to slobber. I watched them with revulsion in my stomach. "Wouldn't you say, mate? Just a lousy, stinking Martian, I mean." I swallowed. I turned away and went around the rock and looked down. One look was enough. Blood was running down the cheek of the prone little Martian boy, and it was coming from his mouth. Then I turned back to the shaking man. "Like I say, mate, I mean, what would you have done in my place? Whistling always did drive me crazy. I can't stand it. A phobia, you know. People suffer from phobias. What did you do? I took 3 steps toward him. I felt my lips straining back from my teeth. Wait now, mate. Like I say, it's a phobia. I can't stand whistling. It makes me suffer. So you cut out his tongue? I didn't wait for his answer. I couldn't wait. While I was still calm, I raised my gun on his trembling figure. I didn't put the gun up again until his body stopped twitching and his fingers stopped clawing in the sands. From the desk to the outside door, the hospital corridor runs just a few feet, but I'd have known her at any distance. I sighed, got to my feet, and met her halfway. She stopped before me and stared up into my eyes. She must have run all the way when she got my message, for although she was standing as rigid as a pole in concrete, something of her exhaustion showed in her eyes. "Tell me," she said in a panting whisper. "Your boy is going to be okay." I put my arm around her. "Everything's under control. The doctors say he's going to live and pull through and—" I stopped. I wondered what words I was going to use when no words that I had ever heard in my life would be the right ones. "Tell me." She pulled from my grasp and tilted her head so that she could look up into my eyes and read them like a printed page. "Tell me." "He cut out the boy's... He said he couldn't stand whistling. It was a phobia, he claimed. 8 bullets cured his phobia, if any." "He cut out what?" "Your son's tongue." I put my arm around her again, but it wasn't necessary. She didn't cry out, she didn't slump. Her head did go down and her eyes did blink once or twice, but that was all. "He was the only little boy on Mars who could whistle," she said. All of the emotion within her was somehow squeezed into those few words. I couldn't get it out of my mind for a long while. I used to lie in bed and think of it somewhat like this. There was this man with his feet planted in the purple sands, and he looked up into the night sky when the moon called Deimos was in perigee, and he studied it. And he said to himself, "Well, I shall write a book, and I shall say in this book that the moon of Mars is thus and so. And I will be accurately describing it, for in truth the moon is thus and so." And on the other side of the planet there was another man, and he too looked up into the night sky, and he began to study the moon called Phobos, and he too decided to write a book, and he knew he could accurately describe the moon of Mars, for his own eyes had told him it looked like thus and so, and his own eyes did not lie. I thought of it in a manner somewhat like that. I could tell the woman that Harry Smythe, her first husband, was the man who had killed Tahili, the Martian she loved. I could tell her Smythe had killed him in a fair fight because the Martian had tried to jump a claim. And her heart would be set to rest, for she would know that the whole thing was erased and done with at last. Or, on the other hand, I could do what I eventually did do. I could tell her absolutely nothing, in the knowledge that that way she would at least have the strength of hate with which to sustain herself through the years of her life. The strength of her hate against this man, whoever he might be, plus the chill joy of anticipating the day, maybe not tomorrow, but some day, when, like the dream of finding gold on Mars, she'd finally track him down and kill him. I couldn't leave her without a reason for living. Her man was dead, and her son would never whistle again. She had to have something to live for, didn't she? Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button. I've recently taken the decision to move most of my stories to Substack, where the channel can continue to prosper in a sustainable way, something which I can no longer do on YouTube due to recent events. So if you want to keep in the loop with 3 free stories every week, plus options to support further, head to my Substack page, which you can see on screen now, and a link in the description. I'll see you there. Dead Ringer by Lester Del Rey. Narrated by William Skye. There was nothing, especially on earth, which could set him free, the truth least of all. Dane Phillips slouched in the window seat watching the morning crowds on their way to work and carefully avoiding any attempt to read Jordan's old face as the editor skimmed through the notes. He had learned to make his tall, bony body seem all loose-jointed relaxation, no matter what he felt. But the oversized hands in his pockets were clenched so tightly that the nails were cutting into his palms. Every tick of the old-fashioned clock sent a throb racing through his brain. Every rustle of the pages seemed to release a fresh shot of adrenaline into his bloodstream. This time, his mind was pleading. It has to be right this time. Jordan finished his reading and shoved the folder back. He reached for his pipe, sighed, and then nodded slowly. "A nice job of researching, Phillips. And it might make a good feature for the Sunday section at that." It took a second to realize that the words meant acceptance, for Phillips had prepared himself too thoroughly against another failure. Now he felt the tautened muscles release so quickly that he would have fallen if he hadn't been braced against the seat. He groped in his mind, hunting for words and finding none. There was only the hot, sudden flame of unbelieving hope, and then an almost blinding exultation. Jordan didn't seem to notice his silence. The editor made a neat pile of the notes, nodding again. "Sure, I like it. We've been short of shock stuff lately, and the readers go for it when we can get a fresh angle. But naturally you'd have to leave out all that nonsense on Blanding. Hell, the man's just buried, and his relatives and friends." "But that's the proof." Phillips stared at the editor, trying to penetrate through the haze of hope that had somehow grown chilled and unreal. His thoughts were abruptly disorganized and out of his control. Only the urgency remained. "It's the key evidence. And we've got to move fast. I don't know how long it takes, but even one more day may be too late." Jordan nearly dropped the pipe from his lips as he jerked upright to peer sharply at the younger man. "Are you crazy? Do you seriously expect me to get an order to exhume him now? What would it get us other than lawsuits? Even if we could get the order without cause, which we can't." Then the pipe did fall as he gaped open-mouthed. "My God, you believe all that stuff? You expected us to publish it straight?" "No," Dane said thickly. The hope was gone now, as if it had never existed, leaving a numb emptiness where nothing mattered. "No, I guess I didn't really expect anything. But I believe the facts. Why shouldn't I?" He reached for the papers with hands he could hardly control and began stuffing them back into the folder. All the careful documentation, the fingerprints, smudged perhaps in some cases, but still evidence enough for anyone but a fool. "Phillips," Jordan said questioningly to himself, and then his voice was taking on a new edge. "Phillips. Wait a minute, I've got it now. Dane Phillips, not Arthur. 2 years on the Trib. Then you turned up on the Register in Seattle. Philip Dean or some such name there." "Yeah," Dane agreed. There was no use in denying anything now. "Yeah, Dane Arthur Phillips. So I suppose I'm through here." Jordan nodded again, and there was a faint look of fear in his expression. "You can pick up your pay on the way out. And make it quick before I change my mind and call the boys in white." It could have been worse. It had been worse before. And there was enough in the pay envelope to buy what he needed, a flash camera, a little folding shovel from one of the surplus houses, and a bottle of good scotch. It would be dark enough for him to taxi out to Oakhaven Cemetery, where Blanding had been buried. It wouldn't change the minds of fools, of course. Even if he could drag back what he might find without the change being completed, they wouldn't accept the evidence. He'd been crazy to think anything could change their minds. And they called him a fanatic. If the facts he'd dug up in 10 years of hunting wouldn't convince them, nothing would. And yet he had to see for himself before it was too late. He picked a cheap hotel at random and checked in under an assumed name. He couldn't go back to his room while there was a chance that Jordan still might try to turn him in. There wouldn't be time for Sylvia's detectives to bother him, probably, but there was the ever-present danger that one of the aliens might intercept the message. He shivered. He'd been risking that for 10 years, yet the likelihood was still a horror to him. The uncertainty made it harder to take than any human-devised torture could be. There was no way of guessing what an alien might do to anyone who discovered that all men were not human, that some were zombies. There was the classic syllogism. All men are mortal. I am a man, therefore I am mortal. But not Blanding, or Corporal Harding. It was Harding's death that had started it all during the fighting on Guadalcanal. A grenade had come flying into the foxhole where Dane and Harding had felt reasonably safe. The concussion had knocked Dane out, possibly saving his life when the enemy thought he was dead. He'd come to in the daylight to see Harding lying there, mangled and twisted, with his throat torn. There was blood on Dane's uniform, obviously spattered from the dead man. It hadn't been a mistake or delusion. Harding had been dead. It had taken Dane 2 days of crawling and hiding to get back to his group, too exhausted to report Harding's death. He'd slept for 20 hours, and when he awoke, Harding had been standing beside him with a whole throat and a fresh uniform, grinning and kidding him for running off and leaving a stunned friend behind. It was no ringer, but Harding himself, complete to the smallest personal memories and personality traits. The pressures of war probably saved Dane's sanity while he learned to face the facts. All men are mortal. Harding is not mortal, therefore Harding is not a man. Nor was Harding alone. Dane found enough evidence to know there were others. The Tribune morgue yielded even more data. A man had faced 7 firing squads and walked away. Another survived over a dozen attacks by professional killers. Fingerprints turned up mysteriously copied from those of men long dead. Some of the aliens seemed to heal almost instantly, others took days. Some operated completely alone, some seemed to have joined with others. But they were legion. Lack of a clearer pattern of attack made him consider the possibility of human mutation, but such tissue was too wildly different, and the invasion had begun long before atomics or X-rays. He gave up trying to understand their alien motivations. It was enough that they existed in secret, slowly growing in numbers while mankind was unaware of them. When his proof was complete and irrefutable, he took it to his editor, to be fired politely but coldly. Other editors were less polite. But he went on doggedly trying and failing. What else could he do? Somehow he had to find the few people who could recognize facts and warn them. The aliens would get him, of course, when the story broke, but a warned humanity could cope with them. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Then he met Sylvia by accident after losing his 5th job, a girl who had inherited a fortune big enough to spread his message in paid ads across the country. They were married before he found she was hard-headed about her money. She demanded a full explanation for every cent beyond his allowance. In the end, she got the explanation, and while he was trying to cash the check she gave him, she visited Dr. Buell to come back with a squad of quiet, refined, strong-arm boys who made sure Dane reached Buell's rest home safely. Hydrotherapy, Buell as the kindly, firm father image, analysis, hypnosis that stripped every secret from him, including his worst childhood nightmare. His father had committed a violent, bloody suicide after one of the many quarrels with Dane's mother. Dane had found the body. 2 nights after the funeral, he had dreamed of his father's face, horror-filled, at the window. He knew now that it was a normal nightmare caused by being forced to look at the face in the coffin, but the shock had lasted for years. It had bothered him again after his discovery of the aliens, until a thorough check had proved without doubt that his father had been fully human, with a human, if tempestuous, childhood behind him. Dr. Buell was delighted. "You see, Dane, you know it was a nightmare, but you don't really believe it even now. Your father was an alien monster to you. No adult is quite human to a child. and that literal-minded self, your subconscious, saw him after he died. So there are alien monsters who return from death. Then you come to from a concussion. Harding is sprawled out unconscious, covered with blood, probably your blood, since you say he wasn't wounded later. But after seeing your father, you can't associate blood with yourself. You see it as a horrible wound on Harding. When he turns out to be alive, you're still in partial shock with your subconscious dominant. And that has the answer already. There are monsters who come back from the dead. An exaggerated reaction, but nothing really abnormal. We'll have you out of here in no time. No non-directive psychiatry for Buell. The man beamed paternally, chuckling as he added what he must have considered the clincher. Anyhow, even zombies can't stand fire, Dane, so you can stop worrying about Harding. I checked up on him. He was burned to a crisp in a hotel fire 2 months ago. It was logical enough to shake Dane's faith until he came across Milo Blanding's picture in a magazine article on society in St. Louis. According to the item, Milo was a cousin of the Blandings, whose father had vanished in Chile as a young man and who had just rejoined the family. The picture was of Harding. An alien could have gotten away by simply committing suicide and being carried from the rest home, but Dane had to do it the hard way, watching his chance and using commando tactics on a guard who had come to accept him as a harmless nut. In St. Louis, he'd used the purloined letter technique to hide, going back to newspaper work and using almost his real name. It had seemed to work too, but he'd been less lucky about Harding Blanding. The man had been in Europe on some kind of a tour until his return only this last week. Dane had seen him just once then, but long enough to be sure it was Harding, before he died again. This time it was in a drunken auto accident that seemed to be none of his fault but left his body in a mangled wreck. It was almost dark when Dane dismissed the taxi at the false address a mile from the entrance to the cemetery. He watched it turn back down the road, then picked up the valise with his camera and folding shovel. He shivered as he moved reluctantly ahead. War had proved that he would never be a brave man, and the old fears of darkness and graveyards were still strong in him. But he had to know what the coffin contained now, if it wasn't already too late. It represented the missing link in his picture of the aliens. What happened to them during the period of regrowth? Did they revert to their natural form? Were they at all conscious while the body reshaped itself into wholeness? Dane had puzzled over it night after night with no answer. Nor could he figure how they could escape from the grave. Perhaps a man could force his way out of some of the coffins he had inspected. The soil would still be soft and loose in the grave, and a lot of the coffins and the boxes around them were strong in appearance only. A determined creature that could exist without much air for long enough might make it. But there were other caskets that couldn't be cracked, at least without the aid of outside help. What happened when a creature that could survive even the poison of embalming fluids and the draining of all the blood woke up in such a coffin? Dane's mind skittered from it, as always, and then came back to it reluctantly. There were still accounts of corpses turned up with the nails and hair grown long in the grave. Could normal tissue stand the current tricks of the morticians to have life enough for such growth? The possibility was absurd. Those cases had to be aliens, ones who hadn't escaped. Even they must die eventually in such a case, after weeks and months. It took time for hair to grow. And there were stories of corpses that had apparently fought and twisted in their coffins still. What was it like for an alien then, going slowly mad while it waited for true death? How long did madness take? He shivered again, but went steadily on while the cemetery fence appeared in the distance. He'd seen Blanding's coffin, and the big solid metal casket around it that couldn't be cracked by any amount of effort and strength. He was sure the creature was still there, unless it had a confederate. But that wouldn't matter. An empty coffin would also be proof. Dane avoided the main gate, unsure about whether there would be a watchman or not. 100 feet away there was a tree near the ornamental spikes of the iron fence. He threw his bag over and began shinnying up. It was difficult, but he made it finally, dropping onto the soft grass beyond. There was the trace of the moon at times through the clouds, but it hadn't betrayed him, and there had been no alarm wire along the top of the fence. He moved from shadow to shadow, his hair prickling along the base of his neck. Locating the right grave in the darkness was harder than he had expected, even with an occasional brief use of the small flashlight. But at last he found the marker that was serving until the regular monument could arrive. His hands were sweating so much that it was hard to use the small shovel, but the digging of foxholes had given him experience and the ground was still soft from the gravedigger's work. He stopped once as the moon came out briefly. Again, a sound in the darkness above left him hovering and sick in the hole. But it must have been only some animal. He uncovered the top of the casket with hands already blistering. Then he cursed as he realized the catches were near the bottom, making his work even harder. He reached them at last, fumbling them open. The metal top of the casket seemed to be a dome of solid lead, and he had no room to maneuver, but it began swinging up reluctantly until he could feel the polished wood of the coffin. Dane reached for the lid with hands he could barely control. Fear was thick in his throat now. What could an alien do to a man who discovered it? Would it be Harding there, or some monstrous thing still changing? How long did it take a revived monster to go mad when it found no way to escape? He gripped the shovel in one hand, working at the lid with the other. Now, abruptly, his nerves steadied, as they had done whenever he was in real battle. He swung the lid up and began groping for the camera. His hand went into the silk-lined interior and found nothing. He was too late. Either Harding had gotten out somehow before the final ceremony, or a Confederate had already been here. The coffin was empty. There were no warning sounds this time, only hands that slipped under his arms and across his mouth, lifting him easily from the grave. A match flared briefly, and he was looking into the face of Buell's chief strong-arm man. "Hello, Mr. Phillips. Promise to be quiet and we'll release you, okay?" At Dane's sickened nod, he gestured to the others. "Let him go. And Tom, better get that filled in. We don't want any trouble from this." Surprise came from the grave a moment later. "Hey, Burke, there's no corpse here." Burke's words killed any hopes Dane had at once. "So what? Ever hear of cremation? Lots of people use a regular coffin for the ashes."
"He wasn't cremated," Dane told him. "You can check up on that."
But he knew it was useless.
"Sure, Mr. Phillips, we'll do that."
The tone was one reserved for humouring madmen. Burke turned, gesturing.
"Better come along, Mr. Phillips. Your wife and Dr. Buell are waiting at the hotel."
The gate was open now, but there was no sign of a watchman. If one worked here, Sylvia's money would have taken care of that, of course. Dane went along quietly, sitting in the rubble of his hopes while the big car purred through the morning and on down Lindell Boulevard toward the hotel. Once he shivered and Burke dug out hot brandied coffee. They had thought of everything, including a coat to cover his dirt-soiled clothes as they took him up the elevator to where Buell and Sylvia were waiting for him. She had been crying, obviously, but there were no tears or recriminations when she came over to kiss him. Funny, she must still love him. As he'd learned to his surprise, he loved her. Under different circumstances.
"So you found me?"
he asked needlessly of Buell. He was operating on purely automatic habits now, the reaction from the night and his failure numbing him emotionally.
"Jordan got in touch with you?"
Buell smiled back at him.
"We knew where you were all along, Dane. But as long as you acted normal, we hoped it might be better than the home. Too bad we couldn't stop you before you got all mixed up in this."
"So I suppose I'm committed to your booby hatch again?"
Buell nodded, refusing to resent the term.
"I'm afraid so, Dane, for a while anyhow. You'll find your clothes in that room. Why don't you clean up a little? Take a hot bath, maybe. You'll feel better."
Dane went in, surprised when no guards followed him. But they had thought of everything. What looked like a screen on the window had been recently installed, and it was strong enough to prevent his escape. Blessed are the poor, for they shall be poorly guarded. He was turning on the shower when he heard the sound of voices coming through the door. He left the water running and came back to listen. Sylvia was speaking.
Seemed so logical, so completely rational. It makes him a dangerous person,
Buell answered, and there was no false warmth in his voice now.
Sylvia, you've got to admit it to yourself. All the reason and analysis in the world won't convince him he's wrong. This time we'll have to use shock treatment. Burn over those memories, fade them out. It's the only possible course.
There was a pause and then a sigh.
I suppose you're right.
Dane didn't wait to hear more. He drew back while his mind fought to accept the hideous reality. Shock treatment? The works, if what he knew of psychiatry was correct. Enough of it to erase his memories, a part of himself. It wasn't therapy Buell was considering. It couldn't be. It was the answer of an alien that had a human in its hands, one who knew too much. He might have guessed. What better place for an alien than in the guise of a psychiatrist? Where else was there the chance for all the refined, modern torture needed to burn out a man's mind? Dane had spent 10 years in fear of being discovered by them, and now Buell had him. Sylvia? He couldn't be sure. Probably she was human. It wouldn't make any difference. There was nothing he could do through her. Either she was part of the game, or she really thought him mad. Dane tried the window again, but it was hopeless. There would be no escape this time. Buell couldn't risk it. The shock treatment, or whatever Buell would use under the name of shock treatment, would begin at once. It would be easy to slip, to use an overdose of something, to make sure Dane was killed. Or there were ways of making sure it didn't matter. They could leave him alive, but take his mind away. In alien hands, human psychiatry could do worse than all the medieval torture chambers. The sickness grew in his stomach as he considered the worst that could happen. Death he could accept if he had to. He could even face the chance of torture by itself, as he had accepted the danger while trying to have his facts published. But to have his mind taken from him, a step at a time, to watch his personality, his ego, rotted away under him, and to know that he would wind up as a drooling idiot. He made his decision almost as quickly as he had come to realize what Buell must be. There was a razor in the medicine chest. It was a safety razor, of course, but the blade was sharp and it would be big enough. There was no time for careful planning. One of the guards might come in at any moment if they thought he was taking too long. Some fear came back as he leaned over the wash basin, staring at his throat, fingering the suddenly murderous blade. But the pain wouldn't last long, a lot less than there would be under shock treatment, and less pain. He'd read enough to feel sure of that. Twice he braced himself and failed at the last second. His mind flashed out in wild schemes fighting against what it knew had to be done. The world still had to be warned. If he could escape somehow, if he could still find a way, he couldn't quit, no matter how impossible things looked. But he knew better. There was nothing one man could do against the aliens in this world they had taken over. He'd never had a chance. Man had been chained already by carefully developed ridicule against superstition, by carefully indoctrinated gobbledygook about insanity, persecution complexes, and all the rest. For a second, Dane even considered the possibility that he was insane. But he knew it was only a blind effort to cling to life. There had been no insanity in him when he'd groped for evidence in the coffin and found it empty. He leaned over the wash basin, his eyes focused on his throat, and his hand came down and around, carrying the razor blade through a lethal semicircle. Dane Phillips watched fear give place to sickness on his face as the pain lanced through him and the blood spurted. He watched horror creep up to replace the sickness while the bleeding stopped and the gash began closing. By the time he recognized his expression as the same one he'd seen on his father's face at the window so long ago, the wound was completely healed.
If you're enjoying the stories, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button. It helps the video spread and the channel continue to grow. Thanks. The Way Out by Richard R. Smith. Narrated by William Skye. How do you kill a man without killing him? Unless that question could be answered, Earth would lose the war and every Earthman would die. The room was a maze of mirrors that reflected his nightmare image. At first he had tried to close his eyes but found that they had done something to them. He could not close them, and was forced to look at the thing in the hundreds of mirrors, seeing it from all angles. He had tried to sleep, thinking that, if asleep, he would not see the mirrors and himself. But they had injected drugs into his body, drugs that made sleep impossible except when they wanted him to sleep. A human body had to have a minimum of sleep. They knew what the minimum was and gave it to him when they wanted him to have it. But even sleep was no release. During those first days, he discovered that a man unable to close his eyes will see while he sleeps. And in every dream, the mirrors and the nightmare were there, superimposed upon the dream as two negatives placed one upon another. If he dreamed that he was a child again, playing in the fields and chasing rabbits, the nightmare image was there, superimposed upon the dream. If he dreamed that he was a teenager, walking Betty home from the movies and holding her soft hand in his, it was there, hovering in the air around them. No matter what he dreamed, it was there. He found that there was one relief from the nightmare, and only one. They had left his right arm intact. In the event, he thought, that I give in, I will be able to write the answers they want to know. But that was not a complete relief. To stare at the smoothness and perfection of flesh on his right arm for long periods was to admit that the rest of his body was... They were clever with pain, he thought. Pain, he had realized during those first days, was a monumental thing to a man. Pain was the first sensation experienced by a man, the slap of the doctor's hand, and the first breath of air in lungs unaccustomed to breathing. And pain was the very last sensation that a man experienced, the pain of death. Crowded in between those two sensations that represented a person's lifespan, pain was the dominant impetus. What drove a man to do anything except the impetus of pain and the instinct to avoid pain? A man did a million things to avoid physical pain. To avoid hunger pains, a man would eat. To avoid the pain of coldness, a man would light a fire. To avoid aching muscles, a man would make a wheel to carry his burden. To lessen that burden, a man would split an atom. And a man did a million other things to avoid emotional pain. To avoid the pain of loneliness, a man would make friends. To avoid the pain of boredom, a man would play a game. To avoid the pain of ugliness, a man would create beauty. Not an unpleasant reality, he realized. Not unpleasant because it was necessary. Nothing in the universe moved unless a force pushed or pulled it. A man unable to sense physical or emotional pain would do nothing. There would be nothing to push him. As wind moved clouds, pain moved man. The sight of his body was not exactly painful to him. They had not disfigured him, they had only changed him. To disassociate him from his body, no doubt. What they had done to him many would call an atrocity, he realized.
But in a war, every time one soldier killed another, it was an atrocity. One man had taken the life of another. They had a job to do, and they were doing it. Successfully, he knew. When they came the next time, he would tell them what they wanted to know. Want to know where Fort Meade is located on Earth? Give me a map and I'll show you. How many soldiers do we have in the mountain range 100 miles from here? I'll give you my best estimate. I'll tell you anything you want. Pain was the impetus to push a man, he knew. They had pushed him, doing their job. And they had pushed him far enough. A man was not linked to other men and his nation and his world by tangible threads. A man was separate and distinct. A man's body was a world in itself. He had been pushed into this world by pain. Somewhere, beyond the wall of pain that came or vanished when they wanted, somewhere, he had friends, an army, a world called Earth. But they didn't matter. His world mattered. And oddly, he wasn't afraid of pain anymore. It was just a thing to be avoided in any way. And he wasn't to be pitied. They had changed him. Sergeant Chester Gregg wasn't a man anymore. He was something that could be added to and subtracted from, a pliable thing that could be prodded and moulded, an object that could be pushed this way and that way. Murphy raised his head. He could tell from the flashes of artillery fire that they were surrounded. Antarian artillery had a purplish flash of light that their own guns did not have. And he could see, in every direction, there was an occasional flash of purplish light. The flashes formed a circle around them. He lowered himself into the foxhole. "What?" Hank inquired. "Surrounded." "Are you sure?" Hank crouched in the semi-darkness as if about to pounce on something. "Damn it, if you don't believe me, take a look." Hank hesitated. He was a tall, lanky person with red hair and boyish freckles. He had an awkward, self-conscious manner, and despite his powerful body, the freckles and manner made others think of him as a boy rather than a man. He was 18, and combat had hardened his muscles without hardening his appearance. "I believe you," he said. "Do you think we'll get out?" "Hard to tell. Maybe." Murphy leaned back and looked up at the dark sky. It was filled with stars that twinkled, and intermingled with them were other points of light that were not stars. They were atomic explosions, and unlike the stars, they did not twinkle. An atomic explosion in outer space without the pressure of atmosphere expanded tremendously. When it reached the limit of expansion, it faded, and watching a battle in outer space was like watching a maze of tiny blinking lights. Murphy watched those tiny blips of light every night. One night, if he lived long enough, there would be no blips of light, and that would mean that one side was beaten. They were fighting and dying on Antares, but their battle was a secondary one. It was the battle in outer space that would win the war. If the Antarians won that battle, then every Earthman on Antares would die, because there would be no more supplies. If Earth won that battle, the Antarians would be beaten since they would have no way to stop Earth from sending more men and more supplies. He closed his eyes and tried to concentrate on the problem of saving Hank's life. That was his habit. Every time he went into combat, he picked someone like Hank, a kid, and stuck with him. He would worry about that kid, whoever he might be, and try to keep him out of tight spots. It was his way of protecting himself. Whenever he worried about his own life, his mind always froze. But worrying about someone else was different. "I think I'd rather die than be captured," Hank said. "I heard they have ways of making a guy talk, ways of making a guy tell them anything." Murphy nodded his head in agreement. It would be better to die than to be captured. The war with the Antarians was different from the world wars on Earth. Antarians were aliens and resembled lizards more than men. There was no way for them to disguise themselves effectively, and they had no agents on Earth to learn the location of factories and military installations. From 1,000 miles in space, if one of their ships were fast enough, they could photograph Earth's surface. Closer than 1,000 miles, rockets from Earth's interceptor system could destroy a ship. Atomic rockets dropped from Antarian ships could zigzag through Earth's atmosphere at tremendous speeds, and 50% got through the interceptor system. But a ship containing enough fuel to take it from Antares to Earth and back was large and unmaneuverable, and venturing closer than 1,000 miles was fatal. And a photograph taken from 1,000 miles does not show factories and military installations. Through magnification, the photograph will show rivers, mountain ranges, land masses, and vari-colored patches of land that could be cities or anything. So the Antarians had been forced to hurl atomic bombs aimlessly. Those that got through the defensive system usually struck deserted areas. The Antarians had only one choice: capture as many soldiers as possible and make them tell where military targets were located. And to them, men were an alien form of life. Their science was not adapted to the human body. They had no drugs to affect the human mind. In the middle of an interplanetary war, they could not spare the workers time, wealth, and effort to invent drugs that had taken mankind itself years to produce. But it took them only a few minutes to make a whip. As Murphy listened, the distant rumble of exploding shells grew in volume. They were walking shells across the surrounded area. He flattened himself against the bottom of the foxhole and covered his ears with his hands. Even through his hands the roar of explosions was deafening, and he felt the ground shake while shell fragments whistled through the air above. That was Antarian tactics, he remembered. Whenever possible, they surrounded an area, pounded it until there were only a few men left, and then charged with their infantry, taking as many prisoners as possible. The roar of exploding shells diminished in volume as the barrage moved farther away. Silence. Murphy checked his rifle and rose. He looked across a desolate terrain covered with craters and smouldering shell fragments. The forest near them, that weird forest of 100-foot trees with green trunks and yellow leaves, was almost gone. The barrage had left only a few trees upright. Trees with their branches torn from them, trees that looked like shadowy fingers pointing at the stars. "I suppose they'll be coming now," Hank said. "Any minute. They always follow a barrage." "I won't surrender," Hank said as he checked his rifle. "I know that. There wouldn't be anything to gain." "You couldn't surrender if you wanted to." "Huh?" "The army doesn't allow it. You see, the army tells you what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and where to do it. There's regulations in the manuals to cover everything. If there aren't regulations about something, that's because the army doesn't allow it. There are no regulations about how to surrender. That means you can't surrender." "Suppose you haven't got anything to fight with?" "No dice. If you've only got one bullet, you fire that bullet.
Then you use your bayonet. If your bayonet breaks, then you pick up rocks and throw them, and if there aren't any rocks around, then you attack with your bare hands. In other words, you keep fighting until you kill them or they kill you. If you surrender, you're a traitor." Hank was silent for a while. "If that's so," he said, "why do they have regulations about what to do after you're captured? You know that give only your name, rank, and serial number stuff." "That," explained Murphy with mock impatience, "is for those cases when a guy might be captured while unconscious. The army's sensible. It knows you can't fight if you've been knocked unconscious by something." "Did you hear the rumor," Hank went on, "that every guy going into combat has something done to him so he'll kill himself if he's captured? Hypnotism or something." "Uh-huh." Murphy wished Hank hadn't mentioned that. He remembered, there at Fort Hendricks, something strange had happened. Take a battalion of men, line them up outside a hospital. One by one, as the men enter a room, give them an injection that knocks them cold. Keep them unconscious for days while you feed them through the veins, and then revive them, put them in a formation, and march them back to their barracks without an explanation. Do something like that and you'll cause all sorts of rumors. Those men will wonder what happened to them while they were unconscious. The more they wonder, the more fantastic the rumors will get. "I doubt it," Murphy said. They had been whispering. No enemy followed a barrage so close that they were killed by their own shells, and Antarians could only move at a certain speed. That always left, immediately after a barrage, a few minutes during which they could talk or whisper in safety. But that time was limited, and they fell silent now. Murphy thought, somewhere out there, lizard-like things are crawling toward us. Any minute now, they'll be close enough to hear us if we make a sound, and they'll be waiting, hoping to hear a sound. They'll be holding their weapons with their tentacles as they move closer. They should be in a zoo where you could see them on Sunday afternoons and laugh. They're funny looking, but it's hard to laugh at them while they're trying to kill you. A rumble of sound. Murphy swung his rifle, aiming through the sights. It was a tank. They had no hand grenades, and it was impossible to knock one out with a rifle. But, he reminded himself, he had explained to Hank. It was a soldier's job to fight, even with rocks if necessary. No, it was one of their tanks. "Let's go. Maybe they'll give us a ride." They climbed out of the foxhole. Murphy ran toward the tank, raising his arms above his head, not a gesture of surrender, but a means of recognition. Antarians could walk on their hind legs, but their physiology did not allow them to raise their forelegs above their heads as men could. At night, when nothing could be seen clearly, it was the most effective password. The tank stopped. A voice came at them through the darkness. "What the hell do you want?" "Got room for 2 more?" Murphy inquired. "Give us a ride out. We're low on ammunition." A moment's hesitation, then, "Get in." Climbing into the tank was like climbing into a dark well. When the lid closed behind them, there was no light. The darkness annoyed Murphy, but he realized it was necessary. There were no slits for the crew to see through. Slits allowed bullets, radiation, and poison gas to enter a tank. The crew observed through periscopes that fitted tight against their faces. They were trained to work in the dark. It was a long, rough ride through the night. Murphy listened to the crew members, the roar of the motor. Now and then there was the sharp bark of the tank's cannon,
and even through 4 inches of steel and lead, he heard the roar of shock waves from distant atomic explosions. Hank whispered, "That wasn't right, was it? I mean, leaving like that and—" "Ever hear of strategic withdrawal?" Murphy asked. "We'll live to fight another day." Murphy slept at times. One time, after being awakened by a nearby explosion, one of the tank crew asked him his name and what unit he was with. He said he would radio their unit and ask if their CO had orders for them. Murphy gave his name and unit, then fell asleep again. Sometime during the night, he felt a hand shaking him. "You lucky stiffs," a voice in the darkness said. "Your CO says you're to return to Earth on the next ship." Colonel Donovan climbed out of the jeep and walked a distance. He was a tall, husky man with powerful shoulders and prematurely grey hair. His face was hard and weather-beaten, and his eyes held the only hint of his intelligence. He did not have the delicate features and slender fingers of an intellectual, but his grey eyes were cold and alert. He had climbed to the rank of colonel partly by his physical strength and partly by that deceptive intelligence. He had an aggressive way of tackling a problem, a way of prodding it and beating it with his mind as if it were a physical thing and he were beating it with his fists. During his career, he had solved numerous problems with his different approach. The intellectuals, the men who solved problems, had minds as alike as if they had been cut from the same pattern. A definite type of physique produced a definite mentality type, and a definite mentality type produced a definite way of thinking. The intellectuals were similar in body and mind, and their answers were often too similar. When the UN wanted a different answer, it called upon men such as Donovan. And Donovan had a new problem. He lit a cigarette without looking away from the ruins. The ruins of Fort Meade. He could see at a glance that it had been a direct hit. Every building had been leveled, the ground scorched and fused into weird glass-like substances. There had been no burial details. Of all the thousands of soldiers at the fort, there had been no remains to bury. He had no special purpose in viewing the ruins except to goad his mind. Reports on his desk in the new Pentagon had informed him of the facts. 7 military bases such as Fort Meade had been bombed by the Antarians. All direct hits. It meant one of 2 things. 1, the Antarians could take a photograph of Earth from 1,000 miles and spot military installations on that photograph. 2, they had tortured prisoners and learned the locations. Number 1 was improbable. Number 2 was very probable. He wondered, how do you prevent a man from giving information? It was an important problem. There seemed to be no way to prevent the Antarians from taking prisoners, no way to prevent them from torturing prisoners. If they captured enough prisoners, they could learn the location of every military base and war plant on Earth. Every soldier knew the location of something vital. Almost every soldier could point to it on an aerial map. It was a simple matter of spotting rivers and mountain ranges and judging distances. The possibilities of preventing their men from talking were few, he realized. There was the standard answer. Give a pill to every soldier and tell him to swallow the pill if he's captured. But that was the wrong answer. It had been used before, but only in the case of espionage agents. Used on an army of men, it would have a demoralizing effect. It would imply that you expected them to be captured. And what percentage of men would commit suicide? Besides that, The news would sooner or later leak out to the civilian population and have a demoralizing effect upon them. How would millions of mothers and wives feel if they knew their sons and husbands had been ordered to kill themselves if captured? No, suicide pills were not the answer. It had to be something different, something original, and as foolproof as anything could be. Preferably a way to kill a captured soldier, a way that the soldier was not aware of. Death seemed the only solution. Any man, tortured hard enough and long enough, would talk. How could you keep that man from talking except by killing him? And still, it wasn't right to kill your own men. How, he thought, can you kill a man without killing him? Hank was pacing the floor. We're on our way, Murph. Back to Earth. No more combat. We'll train other guys how to fight. Instructors. What a deal. Weekend passes, girls, beer, fried chicken, real milk. Lay off, Murphy said. We aren't there yet. Sitting there on the edge of the cot, he struggled for a sense of reality. Nothing seemed real. Nothing had seemed real since they left the foxhole. There everything had seemed real, the coldness and wetness of the mud beneath them, the stars in the sky above them, 1,000 other things. But in the tank there had been nothing but darkness and voices in the darkness. The tank had broken through the Antarian lines and taken them directly to a spaceport. There, in a thick fog, so thick that you could see only a few feet in any direction, they had boarded the ship. In the darkened ship, they had been led to this compartment. They had seen only 2 men aboard the ship, one crew member, seen at a distance, and Greg, the ship's captain. Now they were in outer space, in a small compartment aboard a huge ship. It didn't seem real, and he felt as if they were walking through a shadowy dream. The door opened and Captain Chester Gregg stepped into the room. Greg, Murphy reflected, looked as if he had been taken apart and put together again. There were lines in his face, not lines that came from facial muscles, but the clean-cut lines of a surgeon's scalpel, lines that divided his face into small sections. And the flesh from his forehead to his chin did not change shade gradually. Each section was a slightly different shade than the section next to it. Not a hideous effect, but noticeable when you looked at him closely. Greg was evidently conscious of his appearance, for he stayed in the shadows as much as possible. Greg glanced around the room and grinned. "How do you like your quarters? Fancy, huh?" "Great," Murphy said. "Almost as good as the Ritz. Are we the only passengers?" Greg nodded his head affirmatively. "We had to leave in a hurry. We were scheduled to take more men back, but the Antarians were about to take over that port. We were lucky to get out when we did." Greg hesitated, then went on. "You guys are going to have a tough job when you get back. Not as easy as you might think. I know. I was in the infantry for a while, in a training outfit. Hard work." He placed some papers on the table. "Here's your homework." "Homework?" Hank repeated. "It's the newest thing," Greg explained. "They figure that men who've been in combat with the Antarians can train recruits better than men back on Earth who've never even seen the Antarians. The plan is to train men like yourselves on the way back to Earth. No time wasted. That is, they plan to teach you how to train others. We have a colonel and a couple of lieutenants aboard. You fill out those papers and they'll judge your knowledge of military procedure. Then they'll know exactly how much they'll have to teach you." When Greg left, Murphy examined the papers. As Greg said, the papers were a test of their knowledge of military procedure. There were yes and no questions. Questions such as describe procedure to infiltrate enemy lines, describe procedure for establishing night patrols, describe alternate code system. Hundreds of questions. And an aerial map. The question, give the approximate location of Fort Johnson. And in small print at the bottom, the notation that this was a test of memory and ability to judge distance. Look at this, Hank. Hank studied the map and question. That's easy, he said. I was stationed at Fort Johnson. There's Salt Lake, see? Fort Johnson is about... I said look, not talk. Murphy rose and glared at Hank. You're stupid, he added. What's the matter with you? Hank inquired, his jaw sagging. You're stupid, Murphy repeated. Don't you ever question anything? This whole thing smells fishy. He paced the floor, glaring at the metal walls. There was something wrong with the compartment. It was like any compartment aboard any ship, but there was something wrong. He knew there was something wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint it. It doesn't make sense. We were in a foxhole a few hours ago, and now we're on a ship headed for Earth. It doesn't make sense. We're going to be instructors. And that map is fishy, Murphy continued. That's the sort of thing the Antarians would want to know. They have to photograph Earth from 1,000 miles out. They'd like to know exactly where Fort Johnson is. Well, so what? So what? Hasn't it occurred to you that maybe we're prisoners of the Antarians? Are you serious? Hank inquired. How can we be prisoners? He glanced around the room and shrugged his shoulders. We were picked up by one of our own tanks, and the Antarians capture our tanks now and then. It could have been a trick. Our own men were aboard the tank. We didn't see them. It was too dark inside the tank to see anything. We heard them, Hank insisted. That doesn't mean anything. Murphy remembered that they had been warned about Antarian talkie machines. The Antarians frequently tricked or forced a prisoner to talk for hours. The conversation was recorded, broken down according to individual sounds, and recorded in a talkie machine. The machine resembled a typewriter, and an Antarian could reproduce any vocal sound by pressing one of its keys. A skilled Antarian linguist could use one of the machines and carry on a conversation with perfect English. They had been used during attempts to infiltrate their lines at night, but Murphy realized one could have been used in the tank. Take it easy, Hank said. You're imagining things. We're on one of our own ships. Are we? What have we seen of this ship except the corridor and this compartment? It could be... Well, this compartment could be like a stage. It was so foggy outside we couldn't see anything. He paused to light a cigarette and continued. Greg gave me the idea. I've seen Greg before, at Fort Meade. I remember him, but he doesn't remember me. Of course, that's natural. You meet a lot of guys in the army, and you can't remember them all. But Greg was in the infantry, like he said, and now he's a ship's captain. Our army doesn't work like that. The infantry doesn't take a man and train him to be a spaceship captain. That's the sort of thing the Antarians would do. They have a screwy theory about their soldiers being versatile. Hank's eyebrows rose. There was a trace of doubt on his face. We're here, he said nervously. We can hear the ship's engines. Murphy listened. True, they could hear a ship's engines.
could be a recording," he said. "If there's a possibility, maybe we shouldn't talk so damned much." Hank rose to his feet, frowning. "If you're right, they may have hidden microphones." "What's the difference?" If they were prisoners, Murphy thought, there was no reason to keep the Antarians from knowing that they knew. There would be no chance to escape, no way out. Antarians took their prisoners far behind their lines. A man, a creature who walked upright on 2 legs, could not disguise himself and pass unnoticed among creatures that resembled lizards and crawled on 4 legs. No, if they were prisoners, they would be well behind the lines. There would be no way to escape. But, he wondered, if we're prisoners, why are they trying to keep us from realizing it? They had used a trick to get information, but they could have gotten the same information through torture. He knew he was brave enough to die for his country, but not strong enough to... What's wrong with this compartment? He interrupted the chain of thought. There was something wrong with the compartment. He could sense the wrongness. But what could be wrong with cots, a table, 4 walls, a ceiling, and a floor? There was nothing wrong with them, so that meant there was something wrong that was not in the compartment, something that came into the compartment from outside. What, he thought wildly, is not in here, but comes in here from outside? "I've got it!" Hank jumped, startled. "What?" "Vibrations," Murphy said. "There aren't any." Hank shrugged his shoulders. "It's important," Murphy said. "Remember the troop ship that took us to Antares? I remember I had trouble sleeping because of the vibrations. Every ship has vibrations. The engines kick up one hell of a fuss, and the vibrations travel all over the ship. Not so bad in some places, but you can feel them anywhere." He pressed his hands against a wall. Hank, some of the colour draining from his face, did the same. "See?" Murphy inquired. "There are no vibrations. We're supposed to be in outer space, headed for Earth. There should be vibrations." He hit the wall with his fist. He hit it harder. The wall didn't sound right. Taking his bayonet, he jabbed the wall. The blade cut through a thin layer of metal, a layer of metal no thicker than a 1/16 of an inch. Laughing wildly, he cut a large rectangle. The section clattered to the floor, exposing a layer of wood. He kicked at the wood, dry, crumbling wood that gave away beneath his foot. He climbed through the opening. Hank followed him. Colonel Donovan studied the papers before him with blank eyes. Lately, the project had started to annoy his conscience, and the fact that it was a logical move did not lessen the annoyance. There at Fort Meade, he had faced the problem, how can you keep men from giving information when captured? It had been a vital problem. Without a solution, the Antarians could have learned countless military secrets and ultimately won the war. Death had seemed the only solution, but it had not seemed right to deliberately murder their own men. He had asked himself, how can you kill a man without killing him? And he had come up with the answer. Drive him insane. They had placed him in charge of the project, and he had organized a group of psychologists, psychiatrists, chemists, doctors, and sociologists. He had asked them, can you install the seeds of schizophrenia in a soldier, seeds that will bloom upon the realization that he is a prisoner of the enemy, and only upon that realization? The answer had been, maybe, and they had started on the project. The system had been developed after months of research and experiment.
It worked through a combination of surgery, hypnosis, psychiatric, encephalographic, and chemical treatment, all given to a soldier while under drugs and hypnosis. Although the originator of the system, no one had told him exactly how it worked. In such matters, it was the army's policy not to tell anyone who did not have to know. And not being a scientist, he would not have understood all the mechanics if explained to him. But he had a vague concept. A soldier realizes that he is a prisoner of the enemy, and the realization triggers a reaction planted in his mind. A reaction placed there by surgery, hypnosis, psychiatric, encephalographic, and chemical treatment. The reaction forced the soldier into a schizophrenic dream entirely separated from the world. A tight, permanent dream dissociated from all sensory perception. A dream that not even Antarian whips could reach. And it annoyed his conscience. He was responsible for the insanity of thousands of their men. He could not help feeling that perhaps, if he had tried harder, he could have thought of another way. The door opened and Phillips burst into the room in his customary manner. He threw some papers on Donovan's desk. "Our new project," he said. "A tough one. Impossible, I should say." While Donovan glanced at the papers, Phillips slumped in a chair and lit a cigarette. "The Antarians have made a counter-move," he explained. "We found a way to prevent them from torturing prisoners and getting information, but our system depends on the realization by a soldier that he is a prisoner. The Antarians learned that, and now they have a new approach. They use our tanks that they've captured and pretend to be our troops while they trick information from our men. You see, our men have the treatment, but they don't realize they're prisoners, so the treatment doesn't work. Our new project is to find a way that our men will realize they're prisoners despite any trickery." He shrugged his shoulders as if the problem were a tangible thing and he wished to thrust it aside. "Anyway, the war is almost over and the Antarians are losing. I don't think it will make any difference whether we find a solution or not. The war will probably be over before—" He hesitated when he noticed Donovan's expression. "What's the matter?" he inquired. "You look sick." "Nothing." Phillips nodded his head. "I get it. The same old stuff. Your conscience is bothering you again." He leaned back in the chair, placed his hands behind his head, and looked up at the ceiling. "You're foolish to let it bother you. You know what happened to me yesterday? On the way home I had a flat tire. It was raining, muddy as all hell, and I messed up my last clean uniform. The tire was ruined. Now I haven't got a spare and can't buy one because of this damned war. My wife's sister Louise is staying with us now. Her husband was killed on Antares and she cries all night every night. Now and then she gets Martha crying. Last night I couldn't stand it, so I went out and had a few drinks. I got charged with drunken driving, and when I got home this morning I really caught it. Martha's talking about getting a divorce. She says Donovan groaned. "Phil, I'm interested in your problems. Some day we'll sit down together and cry on each other's shoulder, but—" Phillips raised a hand. "I was trying to illustrate how we all have 100 big and little troubles every day. The fact that the system prevented thousands of men from being tortured does not matter to you. Your stupid conscience hurts because you're responsible for driving men insane. But you don't understand. It's not a simple case of schizophrenia that our men get. It's a schizophrenic dream. The system blocks all sensory contacts and speeds up the mind. You know how a person dreams only a few seconds before he wakes up, and that dream seems days or weeks long? Can you imagine how much a dream can be speeded up and clarified by drugs? How much a dream can be controlled by hypnotic suggestion? How much experience can be... Murphy saw that they were on a street, the tall, angular shadows of strange buildings all around them. He heard a shuffling noise and turned to see Antarians crawling toward them. They were prisoners. For some reason, the Antarians had kept them from realizing it, and a brief, intense pain ripped through his skull. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, then opened them. The Antarians were dead, their bodies riddled with bullets. There at the end of the street, their troops. He looked up at the sky. There were no blinking pinpoints of light among the stars. The war was over. They had won. The years that followed were good ones for Murphy. Although he had never written a line before, he wrote a novel about his war experiences, and it became a bestseller. He went to Hollywood when a motion picture producer purchased the story, and unbelievably became an actor. He had never considered himself a handsome man, but millions of viewers considered him handsome, and beautiful women were attracted to him. He married and became the father of 2 children. Life seemed like a dream, a perfect dream, in which day after day, year after year, everything was perfect. Remember to hit the like button if you're enjoying the stories. Thanks.
Tony and the Beetles by Philip K. Dick. Narrated by William Skye. A 10-year-old boy grows up fast when history catches up with the human race. Reddish-yellow sunlight filtered through the thick quartz windows into the sleep compartment. Tony Rossi yawned, stirred a little, then opened his black eyes and sat up quickly. With one motion, he tossed the covers back and slid to the warm metal floor. He clicked off his alarm clock and hurried to the closet. It looked like a nice day. The landscape outside was motionless, undisturbed by winds or dust shift. The boy's heart pounded excitedly. He pulled his trousers on, zipped up the reinforced mesh, struggled into his heavy canvas shirt, and then sat down on the edge of the cot to tug on his boots. He closed the seams around their tops, and then did the same with his gloves. Next, he adjusted the pressure on his pump unit and strapped it between his shoulder blades. He grabbed his helmet from the dresser, and he was ready for the day. In the dining compartment, his mother and father had finished breakfast. Their voices drifted to him as he clattered down the ramp. A disturbed murmur. He paused to listen. What were they talking about? Had he done something wrong again? And then he caught it. Behind their voices was another voice. Static and crackling pops. The all-system audio signal from Rigel 4. They had it turned up full blast. The dull thunder of the monitor's voice boomed loudly. The war. Always the war. He sighed and stepped out into the dining compartment. Morning, his father muttered. Good morning, dear, his mother said absently. She sat with her head turned to one side, wrinkles of concentration webbing her forehead. Her thin lips were drawn together in a tight line of concern. His father had pushed his dirty dishes back and was smoking, elbows on the table, dark hairy arms bare and muscular. He was scowling, intent on the jumbled roar from the speaker above the sink. How's it going? Tony asked. He slid into his chair and reached automatically for the ersatz grapefruit.
Any news from Orion? Neither of them answered. They didn't hear him. He began to eat his grapefruit. Outside, beyond the little metal and plastic housing unit, sounds of activity grew. Shouts and muffled crashes as rural merchants and their trucks rumbled along the highway toward Carnet. The reddish daylight swelled. Beetlejuice was rising quietly and majestically. "Nice day," Tony said. "No flux wind. I think I'll go down to the N Quarter a while. We're building a neat spaceport, a model, of course, but we've been able to get enough materials to lay out strips for—" With a savage snarl, his father reached out and struck. The audio roar immediately died.
"I knew it!"
He got up and moved angrily away from the table.
"I told them it would happen. They shouldn't have moved so soon. Should have built up Class A supply bases first."
"Isn't our main fleet moving in from Bellatrix?" Tony's mother fluttered anxiously. "According to last night's summary, the worst that can happen is Orion 9 and 10 will be dumped." Joseph Rossi laughed harshly.
"The hell with last night's summary. They know as well as I do what's happening."
"What's happening?" Tony echoed as he pushed aside his grapefruit and began to ladle out dry cereal. "Are we losing the battle?"
"Yes." His father's lips twisted. "Earthmen, losing to Beetles. I told them, but they couldn't wait. My God, there's 10 good years left in this system. Why'd they have to push on? Everybody knew Orion would be tough. The whole damn Beetle fleet strung out around there, waiting for us, and we have to barge right in."
"But nobody ever thought Beetles would fight," Leah Rossi protested mildly. "Everybody thought they'd just fire a few blasts and then—"
"They have to fight. Orion's the last jump-off. If they don't fight here, where the hell can they fight?"
Rossi swore savagely.
"Of course they're fighting. We have all their planets except the inner Orion string. Not that they're worth much, but it's the principle of the thing. If we'd built up strong supply bases, we could have broken up the Beetle fleet and really clobbered it."
"Don't say Beetle," Tony murmured as he finished his cereal. "They're Pas Udeti, same as here. The word beetle comes from Beetlejuice, an Arabian word we invented ourselves." Joe Rossi's mouth opened and closed.
"What are you, a goddamn beetle lover?"
"Joe," Leah snapped, "for heaven's sake." Rossi moved toward the door.
"If I was 10 years younger, I'd be out there. I'd really show those shiny-shelled insects what the hell they're up against. Them and their junky, beat-up old hulks. Converted freighters."
His eyes blazed.
"When I think of them shooting down Terran cruisers with our boys in them—"
"Orion's their system," Tony murmured.
"Their system? When the hell did you get to be an authority on space law? Why, I ought to—"
He broke off, choked with rage.
"My own kid," he muttered. "One more crack out of you today, and I'll hang one on you you'll fill the rest of the week."
Tony pushed his chair back. "I won't be around here today. I'm going into Carnet with my EEP."
"Yeah, to play with Beetles."
Tony said nothing. He was already sliding his helmet in place and snapping the clamps tight. As he pushed through the back door into the lock membrane, he unscrewed his oxygen tap and set the tank filter into action. An automatic response, conditioned by a lifetime spent on a colony planet in an alien system. A faint flux wind caught at him and swept yellow-red dust around his boots. Sunlight glittered from the metal roof of his family's housing unit, one of endless rows of squat boxes set in the sandy slope, protected by the line of ore-refining installations against the horizon. He made an impatient signal, and from the storage shed his EEP came gliding out, catching the sunlight on its chrome trim. "We're going down into Carnet," Tony said, unconsciously slipping into the pass dialect. "Hurry up." The EEP took its position behind him, and he started briskly down the slope, over the shifting sand, toward the road. There were quite a few traders out today. It was a good day for the market, only a fourth of the year was fit for travel. Beetlejuice was an erratic and undependable son, not at all like Sol, according to the edutapes fed to Tony 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. He had never seen Sol himself. He reached the noisy road. Passudetti were everywhere. Whole groups of them with their primitive combustion-driven trucks, battered and filthy, motors grinding protestingly. He waved at the trucks as they pushed past him. After a moment, one slowed down. It was piled with tis, bundled heaps of grey vegetables dried and prepared for the table. A staple of the Passudetti diet. Behind the wheel lounged a dark-faced elderly pass, one arm over the open window, a rolled leaf between his lips. He was like all the other Passudetti, lank and hard-shelled, encased in a brittle sheath in which he lived and died. "You want a ride?" the pass murmured, required protocol when an Earthman on foot was encountered. "Is there room for my EEP?" The pass made a careless motion with his claw. "It can run behind." Sardonic amusement touched his ugly old face. "If it gets to Carnet, we'll sell it for scrap. We can use a few condensers and relay tubing. We're short on electronic maintenance stuff." "I know," Tony said solemnly as he climbed into the cabin of the truck. "It's all been sent to the big repair base at Orion 1. For your war fleet." Amusement vanished from the leathery face. "Yes, the war fleet." He turned away and started up the truck again. In the back, Tony's EEP had scrambled up on the load of tis and was gripping precariously with its magnetic lines. Tony noticed the Passudetti's sudden change of expression, and he was puzzled. He started to speak to him, but now he noticed unusual quietness among the other pass, in the other trucks behind and in front of his own. The war, of course. It had swept through this system a century ago. These people had been left behind. Now all eyes were on Orion, on the battle between the Terran warfleet and the Passudetti collection of armed freighters. "Is it true," Tony asked carefully, "that you're winning?" The elderly pass grunted. "We hear rumors." Tony considered. "My father says Terra went ahead too fast. He said we should have consolidated. We didn't assemble adequate supply bases. He used to be an officer when he was younger. He was with the fleet for 2 years. The pass was silent a moment. "It's true," he said at last, "that when you're so far from home, supply is a great problem. We, on the other hand, don't have that. We have no distances to cover." "Do you know anybody fighting?" "I have distant relatives." The answer was vague. The pass obviously didn't want to talk about it. "Have you ever seen your war fleet?" "Not as it exists now. When this system was defeated, most of our units were wiped out. Remnants limped to Orion and joined the Orion fleet." "Your relatives were with the remnants?" "That's right." "Then you were alive when this planet was taken?" "Why do you ask?" The old pass quivered violently. "What business is it of yours?" Tony leaned out and watched the walls and buildings of Carnet grow ahead of them. Carnet was an old city. It had stood thousands of years. The Pasudeti civilization was stable. It had reached a certain point of technocratic development and then levelled off. The Pass had inter-system ships that had carried people and freight between planets in the days before the Terran Confederation. They had combustion-driven cars, audiophones, a power network of a magnetic type. Their plumbing was satisfactory, and their medicine was highly advanced. They had art forms, emotional and exciting. They had a vague religion.
"Who do you think will win the battle?" Tony asked.
"I don't know." With a sudden jerk, the old Pass brought the truck to a crashing halt. "This is as far as I go. Please get out and take your EEP with you." Tony faltered in surprise.
"But aren't you going—"
"No farther." Tony pushed the door open. He was vaguely uneasy. There was a hard, fixed expression on the leathery face, and the old creature's voice had a sharp edge he had never heard before.
"Thanks,"
he murmured. He hopped down into the red dust and signalled his EEP. It released its magnetic lines, and instantly the truck started up with a roar, passing on inside the city. Tony watched it go, still dazed. The hot dust lapped at his ankles. He automatically moved his feet and slapped at his trousers. A truck honked, and his EEP quickly moved him from the road up to the level pedestrian ramp. Pasudeti in swarms moved by, endless lines of rural people hurrying into Karnit on their daily business. A massive public bus had stopped by the gate and was letting off passengers. Male and female Pass. And children. They laughed and shouted, the sounds of their voices blended with the low hum of the city.
"Going in?"
A sharp Pasudeti voice sounded close behind him.
"Keep moving, you're blocking the ramp."
It was a young female with a heavy armload clutched in her claws. Tony felt embarrassed. Female Pass had a certain telepathic ability, part of their sexual makeup. It was effective on Earthmen at close range.
"Here," she said. "Give me a hand."
Tony nodded his head and the EEP accepted the female's heavy armload.
"I'm visiting the city,"
Tony said as they moved with the crowd toward the gates.
"I got a ride most of the way, but the driver let me off out here." "You're from the settlement?"
"Yes." She eyed him critically.
"You've always lived here, haven't you?"
"I was born here.
My family came here from Earth 4 years before I was born. My father was an officer in the fleet. He earned an emigration priority." "So you've never seen your own planet? How old are you?"
10 years, Terran."
"You shouldn't have asked the driver so many questions."
They passed through the decontamination shield and into the city. An information square loomed ahead. Pass men and women were packed around it. Moving chutes and transport cars rumbled everywhere. Buildings and ramps and open-air machinery. The city was sealed in a protective dust-proof envelope. Tony unfastened his helmet and clipped it to his belt. The air was stale-smelling, artificial, but usable.
"Let me tell you something,"
the young female said carefully as she strode along the foot-ramp beside Tony.
"I wonder if this is a good day for you to come into Karnit. I know you've been coming here regularly to play with your friends, but perhaps today you ought to stay at home in your settlement."
"Why?"
"Because today everybody is upset."
"I know," Tony said. "My mother and father were upset. They were listening to the news from our base in the Rigel system."
"I don't mean your family. Other people are listening too. These people here. My race."
"They're upset, all right," Tony admitted. "But I come here all the time. There's nobody to play with at the settlement, and anyhow we're working on a project."
"A model spaceport."
That's right. Tony was envious. I sure wish I was a telepath. It must be fun. The female Pasudeti was silent. She was deep in thought. What would happen, she asked, if your family left here and returned to Earth? That couldn't happen. There's no room for us on Earth. Sea bombs destroyed most of Asia and North America back in the 20th century. Suppose you had to go back. Tony did not understand. But we can't. Habitable portions of Earth are overcrowded. Our main problem is finding places for Terrans to live in other systems. He added, and anyhow, I don't particularly want to go to Terra. I'm used to it here. All my friends are here. I'll take my packages, the female said. I go this other way, down this 3rd level ramp. Tony nodded to his EEP, and it lowered the bundles into the female's claws. She lingered a moment, trying to find the right words. Good luck, she said. With what? She smiled faintly, ironically. With your model's spaceport. I hope you and your friends get to finish it. Of course we'll finish it, Tony said, surprised. It's almost done. What did she mean? The Pasudeti woman hurried off before he could ask her. Tony was troubled and uncertain. More doubts filled him. After a moment, he headed slowly into the lane that took him toward the residential section of the city. Past the stores and factories, to the place where his friends lived. The group of Pasudeti children eyed him silently as he approached. They had been playing in the shade of an immense hengelo, whose ancient branches drooped and swayed with the air currents pumped through the city. Now they sat unmoving. I didn't expect you today, Bepreeth said in an expressionless voice. Tony halted awkwardly, and his EEP did the same. How are things? He murmured. Fine. I got a ride part way. Fine. Tony squatted down in the shade. None of the past children stirred. They were small, not as large as Terran children. Their shells had not hardened, had not turned dark and opaque like horn. It gave them a soft, unformed appearance, but at the same time it lightened their load. They moved more easily than their elders. They could hop and skip around still. But they were not skipping right now. What's the matter? Tony demanded. What's wrong with everybody? No one answered. Where's the model? He asked. Have you fellows been working on it? After a moment, Lyra nodded slightly. Tony felt dull anger rise up inside him. Say something! What's the matter? What are you all mad about? Mad? Bepreeth echoed. We're not mad. Tony scratched aimlessly in the dust. He knew what it was. The war again. The battle going on near Orion. His anger burst up wildly. Forget the war. Everything was fine yesterday before the battle. Sure, Lyra said. It was fine. Tony caught the edge to his voice. It happened 100 years ago. It's not my fault. Sure, Bepreeth said. This is my home, isn't it? Haven't I got as much right here as anybody else? I was born here. Sure, Lyra said tonelessly. Tony appealed to them helplessly. Do you have to act this way? You didn't act this way yesterday. I was here yesterday. All of us were here yesterday. What's happened since yesterday? The battle, Bepreeth said. What difference does that make? Why does that change everything? There's always war. There have been battles all the time as long as I can remember. What's different about this? Bepreeth broke apart a clump of dirt with his strong claws. After a moment, he tossed it away and got slowly to his feet. "Well," he said thoughtfully, "according to our audio relay, it looks as if our fleet is going to win this time." "Yes," Tony agreed, not understanding. "My father says we didn't build up adequate supply bases. We'll probably have to fall back to—" And then the impact hit him. "You mean for the first time in 100 years?" "Yes," Lyra said, also getting up. The others got up too. They moved away from Tony toward the nearby house. "We're winning. The Terran flank was turned half an hour ago. Your right wing has folded completely." Tony was stunned. "And it matters. It matters to all of you." "Matters?" Bepreeth halted, suddenly blazing out in fury. "Sure it matters. For the first time in a century. The first time in our lives we're beating you. We have you on the run, you—" He choked out the word, almost spat it out. "You white grubs!" They disappeared into the house. Tony sat gazing stupidly down at the ground, his hands still moving aimlessly. He had heard the word before, seen it scrawled on walls and in the dust near the settlement. White grubs. The past term of derision for Terrans. Because of their softness, their whiteness. Lack of hard shells. Pulpy, doughy skin. But they had never dared say it out loud before. To an Earthman's face. Beside him, his EEP stirred restlessly. Its intricate radio mechanism sensed the hostile atmosphere. Automatic relays were sliding into place. Circuits were opening and closing. "It's all right," Tony murmured, getting slowly up. "Maybe we'd better go back." He moved unsteadily toward the ramp, completely shaken. The EEP walked calmly ahead, its metal face blank and confident, feeling nothing, saying nothing. Tony's thoughts were a wild turmoil. He shook his head, but the crazy spinning kept up. He couldn't make his mind slow down, lock in place. "Wait a minute," a voice said. Bepreeth's voice from the open doorway. Cold and withdrawn, almost unfamiliar. "What do you want?" Bepreeth came toward him, claws behind his back in the formal Pasudeti posture used between total strangers. "You shouldn't have come here today." "I know," Tony said. Bepreeth got out a bit of tis stalk and began to roll it into a tube. He pretended to concentrate on it. "Look," he said, "you said you have a right here, but you don't." Tony murmured. "Do you understand why not? You said it isn't your fault. I guess not. But it's not my fault either. Maybe it's nobody's fault. I've known you a long time." 5 years, Terran. Bepreeth twisted the stalk up and tossed it away. "Yesterday we played together. We worked on the spaceport. But we can't play today. My family said to tell you not to come here anymore." He hesitated and did not look Tony in the face. "I was going to tell you anyhow, before they said anything." "Oh," Tony said. "Everything that's happened today, the battle, our fleet stand, we didn't know. We didn't dare hope. You see? A century of running. First this system, then the Rigel system, all the planets, then the other Orion stars. We fought here and there, scattered fights. Those that got away joined up. We supplied the base at Orion, you people didn't know. But there was no hope, at least nobody thought there was." He was silent a moment. "Funny," he said. What happens when your back's to the wall and there isn't any further place to go? Then you have to fight. If our supply bases, Tony began thickly, but Bepreeth cut him off savagely. Your supply bases. Don't you understand? We're beating you. Now you'll have to get out. All you white grubs. Out of our system. Tony's EEP moved forward ominously. Bepreeth saw it. He bent down, snatched up a rock, and hurled it straight at the EEP. The rock clanged off the metal hull and bounced harmlessly away. Bepreeth snatched up another rock. Lyra and the others came quickly out of the house. An adult pass loomed up behind them. Everything was happening too fast. More rocks crashed against the EEP. One struck Tony on the arm. Get out! Bepreeth screamed. Don't come back! This is our planet! His claws snatched at Tony. We'll tear you to pieces if you... Tony smashed him in the chest. The soft shell gave like rubber, and the pass stumbled back. He wobbled and fell over, gasping and screeching. Beetle! Tony breathed hoarsely. Suddenly he was terrified. A crowd of Pasudeti was forming rapidly. They surged on all sides, hostile faces, dark and angry, a rising thunder of rage. More stones showered. Some struck the EEP, others fell around Tony near his boots. One whizzed past his face. Quickly, he slid his helmet in place. He was scared. He knew his EEP's E-signal had already gone out, but it would be minutes before a ship could come. Besides, there were other Earthmen in the city to be taken care of. There were Earthmen all over the planet. In all the cities. On all the 23 Beetlejuice planets. On the 14 Rigel planets. On the other Orion planets. We have to get out of here, he muttered to the EEP. Do something. A stone hit him on the helmet. The plastic cracked, air leaked out, and then the autoseal filmed over. More stones were falling. The pass swarmed close, a yelling, seething mass of black-sheathed creatures. He could smell them, the acrid body odour of insects, hear their claws snap, feel their weight. The EEP threw its heat beam on. The beam shifted in a wide band toward the crowd of Pasudeti. Crude hand weapons appeared. A clatter of bullets burst around Tony. They were firing at the EEP. He was dimly aware of the metal body beside him. A shuddering crash. The EEP was toppled over. The crowd poured over it. The metal hull was lost from sight. Like a demented animal, the crowd tore at the struggling EEP. A few of them smashed in its head. Others tore off struts and shiny arm sections. The EEP ceased struggling. The crowd moved away, panting and clutching jagged remains. They saw Tony. As the first line of them reached for him, the protective envelope high above them shattered. A Terran scout ship thundered down, heat beams screaming. The crowd scattered in confusion, some firing, some throwing stones, others leaping for safety. Tony picked himself up and made his way unsteadily toward the spot where the scout was landing. I'm sorry, Joe Rossi said gently. He touched his son on the shoulder. I shouldn't have let you go down there today. I should have known. Tony sat hunched over in the big plastic easy chair. He rocked back and forth, face pale with shock. The scout ship which had rescued him had immediately headed back toward Carnet. There were other Earthmen to bring out besides this first load. The boy said nothing. His mind was blank. He still heard the roar of the crowd, felt its hate, a century of pent-up fury and resentment. The memory drove out everything else. It was all around him, even now. And the sight of the floundering EEP, the metallic ripping sound as its arms and legs were torn off and carried away. His mother dabbed at his cuts and scratches with antiseptic. Joe Rossi shakily lit a cigarette and said, "If your EEP hadn't been along, they'd have killed you. Beetles." He shuddered. "I should never have let you go down there. All this time. They might have done it any time, any day. Knifed you. Cut you open with their filthy goddamn claws." Below the settlement, the reddish-yellow sunlight glinted on gun barrels. Already, dull booms echoed against the crumbling hills. The defense ring was going into action. Black shapes darted and scurried up the side of the slope. Black patches moved out from Carnet toward the Terran settlement, across the dividing line the Confederation surveyors had set up a century ago. Carnet was a bubbling pot of activity. The whole city rumbled with feverish excitement. Tony raised his head. They turned our flank." "Yeah," Joe Rossi stubbed out his cigarette. "They sure did. That was at 1 o'clock. At 2, they drove a wedge right through the center of our line. Split the fleet in half. Broke it up, sent it running. Picked us off one by one as we fell back. Christ, they're like maniacs. Now that they've got the scent, the taste of our blood."
"But it's getting better," Leah fluttered. "Our main fleet units are beginning to appear."
"We'll get them," Joe muttered. "It'll take a while. But by God, we'll wipe them out. Every last one of them. If it takes 1,000 years. We'll follow every last ship down. We'll get them all." His voice rose in frenzy. "Beetles! Goddamn insects! When I think of them trying to hurt my kid with their filthy black claws—"
"If you were younger, you'd be in the line," Leah said. "It's not your fault you're too old. The heart strain's too great. You did your job. They can't let an older person take chances. It's not your fault."
Joe clenched his fists. "I feel so futile. If there was only something I could do."
"The fleet will take care of them," Leah said soothingly. "You said so yourself. They'll hunt every one of them down, destroy them all. There's nothing to worry about."
Joe sagged miserably. "It's no use. Let's cut it out. Let's stop kidding ourselves."
"What do you mean?"
"Face it. We're not going to win. Not this time. We went too far. Our time's come." There was silence. Tony sat up a little.
"When did you know?"
"I've known a long time."
"I found out today. I didn't understand at first. This is stolen ground. I was born here, but it's stolen ground."
"Yes, it's stolen. It doesn't belong to us."
"We're here because we're stronger. But now we're not stronger. We're being beaten."
"They know Terrans can be licked, like anybody else." Joe Rossi's face was grey and flabby. "We took their planets away from them. Now they're taking them back. It'll be a while, of course. We'll retreat slowly. It'll be another 5 centuries going back. There's a lot of systems between here and Sol."
Tony shook his head, still uncomprehending. "Even Lyra and Bepreeth. All of them. Waiting for their time to come. For us to lose and go away again. Where we came from."
Joe Rossi paced back and forth. "Yeah, we'll be retreating from now on. Giving ground instead of taking it.
It'll be like this today, losing fights, draws, stalemates, and worse. He raised his feverish eyes toward the ceiling of the little metal housing unit, face wild with passion and misery. But by God, we'll give them a run for their money. All the way back. Every inch.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this compilation, there are dozens more over in the playlist section of the channel, along with hundreds of standalone stories. Make sure you're subscribed so you keep up to date with all my new videos. See you in the next one.